Public.
Enemy Public, I saw your thing on YouTube, man. Keep doing your thing, bro.
Get your copy of Fire. It's definitely a must-read. If you enjoy hood books, this one is it. Just like the title of the book, it's officially Fire. Get it on Amazon, paperback or Kindle.
Peace. This is the enemy's public. I am Bro.Nasir. Tonight, discussion is the CIA and drugs and the Bay of Pigs invasion. Now, Prescott Bush, father of George Herbert Walker Bush, grandfather of George W. Bush, used to be the head of the CIA. And the CIA is a federal agency that supposed to be an agency that suppress crimes, just like the FBI and law enforcement all over the United States. Peace to my brother, Big Dog Philly OG. Thanks for tapping in. And during the history of the CIA, they committed more crimes than they suppressed crimes. As a matter of fact, the CIA did assassinations all over the world. Corporate assassination, governmental assassinations all over the world. And they also assassinated some of its politicians and leaders. And we want to tie that in. Before I do, I'm going to play a few music selections. Salute to Chief Crazy Understanding. Thanks for tapping in. Now, back in the 80s, there was a so-called war on drugs. And George Herbert Walker Bush had the crack cocaine with him when he was doing the so-called PSA, telling people to stay away from drugs. And Nancy Reagan used to do it when her husband was the president during the R&B era, Reagan and Bush. And it's so hypocritical because when Ricky Ross was selling drugs all over the United States, he was getting his drugs from the CIA and the United States military. So all the drugs that was flooded in the major cities, starting from California and crossing over all the way to the East Coast, those drugs was flooded. Those drugs were put on the streets in our communities by federal agencies, and they were doing raids, locking people up, when they were the ones who flooded our communities with the drugs in the first place. Now, before I get into the presentation, I'm going to play a few music selections.
Yeah. Genius. Look. Nigga with attitude is back. Swag on 100 with an attitude to match. Heavy verse, your funeral. Eulogy of raps. Got niggas like damn, it's sad the way he had to do the track. Look. Cause everything I touch, I tend to body. Shout out to the young G's coming up behind me. The young me did a bid, paid his debt to society. Bunch of niggas fled, but a couple stayed beside me. And my niggas still clutching in that lobby. Hustling and pack while they puffing on that lolly. Muscle in the back if you suckers wanna try me. Cause I done seen the scrap turn into a fucking homie. And I know his hitters still trying to line me. So I guess I gotta melt niggas like pastrami. When I drop, they gon' shelf niggas, that's on mommies. Flex hit his verse, I guarantee he gon' bomb me. Cause they never seen a flow like this, like jail food. Bet you I'ma blow up quick. I'ma keep shooting even if I throw up bricks. Cause eventually it's gonna be a show enough switch. I'm a G and I ain't never had to throw up shit. Where I'm from, my young boys gotta grow up quick. Got the game on lock since I sold up zips. Just no tie gon' shine like a glow up stick. Damn. But first I gotta tie up all these loose ends. Hard times showed me on my true friends. I've been seeing life through a new lens. Just know my motivation is a new Benz. I told her she can hang, but that dude pins. I'm rolling with the gang, bring some cute friends. But don't you get no funny ideas, cause my cousin Samir always walk around with two twins. I call them shits T and Tamara. Empty the whole clip, that's freeing up the barrel. Dinners with gold tips, I'm fleeing my apparel to get rich as a road trip, that's even if it's narrow. But I'm gonna ride till the wheels fall. These niggas ain't thorough, they just feel hard. Me, I call the shots like a drill sergeant. The plug got locked, but I'm still charged. Quarterback in the pack, I'm Cam Newton. Singing, I happen to rack, my swag stupid. I've been doing this since I was a kid hooping. When you got it for this long, you can't lose it. When you got a team this strong, they can't move it. Niggas try to steal my style, but can't boost it. I'm just trying to fill my pile, advance to it. It's just paper, Prezi, and tie, my clan too lit. My clan too lit. Just paper, Prezi, and tie, my clan too lit. Pixar, baby. Let's go. Look, And I don't give a damn if they shoot, cause they don't wanna see me when I start the plane in my group. These snakes creeping through my garden trying to land on my stoop, but the grass cut, guess you could say it's animal poop. While y'all was out getting high, mixing cram with the goose, I was serving this 85, mixing clam in the soup. I've been hanging in the trenches, I'm the man in the noose. If you a soldier, then why the fuck you abandon your troops? Niggas claiming they the realest, while I judge them by their dealings. It's been a little minute, but you fucking with the illest. The upside is crazy, you can play the villain. If I loosen up this tie, I'll be busting out the ceiling. But they don't even get it, shit went over their head. I'm feeling like a killer, plus I'm close to the edge. If you don't wanna be the reason why they toasting the dead, then let me eat, cause I'm the nigga that's supposed to get fed. When I still had a couple left, niggas still double checked and watch a nigga date, just to see if they in trouble yet. Been away for 8 and niggas still ain't start the bubble yet. Guess they in the way, my city waiting on another vet. And Ty don't mind being a savior. First I got some niggas to find, that's on my way up. My mother told me leave them alone, cause they ain't worth it. But I told her, Mom, my mind already made up. These niggas gotta feel it, yeah, I'm talking about my rap. Cause they been in my way like they was walking in my path. I hear these niggas talking about they talking out they ass. When niggas talking about Ty, that shit resulting in a blast. When I get off my shit, my niggas gotta love it. My city been going in and I'm a product of it. And after this, I better be the topic of discussion. Cause truth is you ain't gonna find out how the subject. I need that type of paper that the scholars touching. That type of daughter when you get it, you ain't got a budget. I need that type of paper that the scholars touching. That type of daughter when you get it, you ain't got a budget. Has it?
Tahas, the genius.
Complex.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm seeing these visions, stacking these 50s, these hundreds. You feel me, my nigga? I fuck with gorillas. Fingers is itching and hands on the trigger. You ain't fucking with them, ain't fucking with us. I said we gon' get them. My head is not missing, have them bouncing like Tigger. You know you don't want war, this is not what you came for. No, you ain't fucking with the young boy, that shit's unheard of. Keep a red beam on this thing, I look like a hero. I'll be knocking at your front door, this ain't a game, make a run for. About to take flight. Sipping this purple, I'm writing, I'm leaning, I'm high, you not fucking with I. Make it look easy, way I'm so greasy, believe me, you know I'm gon' ride. Know I'm gon' ride. With that shit on my side, make the beast come alive. Send them goons to your vibe. Want you dead or alive? No ferry, my nigga. I swear on my niggas, I bury a nigga. Go carry a nigga, but I'm a bit iller, bitch. Welcome to Thriller. Yes, we are them demons. Ride around with the heater. I keep it, believe it. I keep it, believe it. Like, please, you see it. They hit you, you leak it. Brain losing screws, I can't pick up the pieces. But Lord, I'm so nice that I leave myself speechless. You know you don't want war. This is not what you came for. No, you ain't fucking with the young boy, that shit's unheard of. Keep a red beam on this thing, I look like a hero. I'll be knocking at your front door, this ain't a game, make a run for.
Money coming in and they hating on me, but that's okay, gotta get it in. Everywhere that I go, niggas knows we MC, but that's okay, gotta get it in. Man, you know that I hustle, man, I'm tryna get a million. And you know that I play to win. All my niggas riding with me, and you know they make it kill. Let them know that we play to win. My youngest is riding, you know how that go. Life is a blessing, and I'm set to go. Stuck in the struggle, I gotta get go. Stuck in the struggle, I gotta get go. Check on your niggas and look in their eyes. None of they riding, they feeding you lies. They using your name and your ties to get by. Ain't no G-Mac, and we gotta provide.
You know you don't want war. This is not what you came for. No, you ain't fucking with the young boy. That shit's unheard of. Keep a red beam on this thing, I look like a hero. I'll be knocking at your front door. This ain't a game, make a run for.
Forward thinking and I grow. Stupid leaning, lucid dreaming. I was sleeping like a Luther King and then I woke with codeine all in my dope. Chopping, screw, treating music demons like a human being, friend of ghosts. I don't see no hater player. Please do me no favor, player, hater, gamer in the game, grinding, say a prayer for him on him in the morning. Nothing for him but a J up in the air with no care. Right after I fuck the day up. up in air, I'm prepared. Now me be on P's and Q's, mine on turbo. In my circle, you will never see a Q. Me no fool, me accused of some fuck shit. Fuck this, I fuck shit up and leave a pool of blood and guts quick. Me to do to keep it cool and see it moves erupting. A twinkle of an eye, you see evil in eye when I rebuttal these rhymes for those who go through troubling times, for those who don't confide, suffer and die inside.
You know you don't want war, this is not what you came for. No, you ain't fucking with the young boy, that shit's unheard of. Keep a red beam on this thing, I look like a hero. I'll be knocking at your front door, this ain't a game, make a run for.
Well, Bad Dreams, featuring Monster and J Small. Now we're going to get into the presentation. Again, today's discussion is, or subject is, the CIA and drugs and the Bay of Pigs invasion or raids. Let me find it. Here we go. Now, the first video is going to be the CIA connections with drug trafficking. They denied it at the hearing. And Gary Webb is going to give his testimony on the CIA involvement in drug trafficking. All federal agencies, including local police, were involved in drugs.
CIA on the sale of narcotics in West Los Angeles, on the possible connections with the CIA on the sale of narcotic knowledge, information, and belief. The San Jose Mercury News identified a number of individuals as being involved in the drug trade and of having possible connections with the CIA, and we have proceeded to try to determine what the evidence is and what the facts are.
Convening this hearing and also making a public hearing.
West Los Angeles, on the allegation of use of funds to support the Contras.
I would say that that all of this story, rather than about crack, is about crap. That's my crap. Yes. Rather than crack is crap. That's the way I look at it. It's a preposterous,
Unfounded,
ridiculous.
We are proceeding.
The police and the federal agencies always investigate themselves and find no wrongdoing. That's what they do when they get caught selling drugs. They setting people up, having them doing decades in prison for crimes they didn't commit. Even when they kill people, they investigate themselves and find no wrongdoing.
Investigate George Bush. And here's the evidence in this special report if anybody cares to find out what the truth is.
We understand the high level of emotional involvement, and we are prepared to allow some leeway to have you express yourselves, although this is not in accordance with the regular rules. We are prepared to listen to you. This meeting, Senator Shelby.
Mr. Chairman, I
Respectful exchange of views. Use the time wisely by.
It is an appalling charge. It is an appalling charge that goes to the heart of this country. We must deal if we are going to stop drugs from coming into the country. Government and the CIA.
They denied
the
it.
CIA has long been accused of turning a blind eye to or being downright complicit in drug trafficking all over the world. But is there any truth to those allegations? Well, you're going to find out in today's episode.
This video is courtesy of Joshua Roberts.
I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you are watching Lawyer Up. In today's episode, we are going to look at the CIA and its alleged history of trafficking drugs and, in some cases, trafficking arms throughout the world. Now, we're going to start off by talking about the CIA in general and what makes that agency different from all other agencies of the federal government. And then we're going to get into the specific allegations of drug trafficking. We're going to go over to Europe, into France, and talk about the French Connection. We're going to go to Southeast Asia and talk about Air America. Then we're going to go down to Latin America and get into the Iran-Contra scandal. And finally, we're going to go over to Afghanistan and talk about the Golden Crescent. We're also going to hit a little bit about Panama.
Don't forget Nicaragua and Emmanuel Noriega always say that the United States do the dirt with you to get the dirt on you. They know you did it because they was there doing it with you when you was doing it.
Panama and Mexico, all in today's episode. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and recall that the episodes of Lawyer Up are available now on all major podcast outlets. So the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, is a civilian foreign intelligence service of the United States government. It is officially tasked with gathering, processing, and analyzing national security information from around the world. The CIA is headquartered in Langley, Virginia, about 10 miles from D.C., and it is primarily focused on providing intelligence to the president and the cabinet. Now, unlike the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, which is a law enforcement service, the CIA has no law enforcement function. Remember that. That becomes important as we move along. It is instead focused on,
which is why they're so lawless, because they don't have any law enforcement function. They're lawless. It's not as if law enforcement obey the law. Most of law enforcement don't even know the law and don't care about the law, don't care about rights. When they get sworn in, they're repeating. Somebody say, repeat after me. They put their hands on the Bible, hold their hand up, and they repeat after what whoever swearing them in say. So they don't even know the law themselves.
focused on overseas intelligence gathering. It is the only agency that is authorized by law to carry out covert actions at the request of the president. And this includes providing support to foreign political groups and governments. So there are some important things to remember about the CIA. Number one, they are not law enforcement. People say, well, how could they just stand around and watch illegal things happening? Well, it's because they ain't law enforcement, right? That's not their job. Number two, they are authorized by law to operate covertly, which means secretly, as opposed to all other agencies or government bodies that need to be open and transparent. That's not so with the CIA. They do things in secret. And number three, the CIA operates with a morality that the ends justify the means, or that the end goal is the focus, and it is to be achieved by any means necessary. Now, note that,
including murdering anybody who's in their way, any means necessary.
is different than, say, traditional law enforcement. They have to follow the law on the way to the ends, right? On the way.
Now, you know that's some bullshit as far as following the law. The police all over the United States do not follow the law, because if half of the police would do their job, the other half would be in prison.
Way to the goal. Not so with the CIA. They have a morality that whatever they have to do to get to the goal is okay. So what is that goal? Well, for the first few decades of its existence, the CIA was focused on repelling the advancement of communism from around the globe. Their goal was to keep communism from gaining a foothold by whatever means necessary. Now, since 9/11, the focus has changed to more of a counterterrorism function, with cyber terrorism emerging as the newest area of focus within the CIA. And what we have seen repeatedly with the CIA over the last several decades is that they will team up with a criminal element when they share a common enemy. For example, communism. As they say, sometimes a common enemy can make strange bedfellows, such is the way of the CIA and organized crime from around the world. And remember, the CIA doesn't have a military fleet at their disposal. Nonetheless, they have fought many secret wars for the United States by essentially choosing a side in an internal conflict and then supplying the side that they choose to support with the things that it needs: lawyers, guns, and money, right? Well, more specifically, they supply it with intelligence, guns, and money. Now, intelligence is pretty easy for an intelligence agency to come by, but guns and money can be much more difficult to supply. And wars are ridiculously expensive. So the CIA has become very clever and creative over the years of covertly generating manpower, arms, and money. And this includes a history of looking the other way, protecting, and sometimes downright participating in the trafficking of illegal arms and contraband to serve the greater interests of the United States. In this video, we are primarily focusing on the CIA's involvement with,
in other words, selling illegal guns, and they say it's the best interest of the United States. So how is putting guns and drugs in our communities serving the best interest of the United States, which is what they do and what they've done? They finance the gang wars. They put the guns in the so-called gangs in the United States. As a matter of fact, our organizations were made what they are today by the CIA. When the CIA was done with their assignments all over the world, they were assigned to our organizations. They were assigned to the Panther Party. They were assigned to the Crips. They were assigned to the Bloods, and they made them what they are today, because the Crips and the Bloods were actually vanguards of our community to really suppress, like, police brutality in our communities. But the CIA went in and made them what they are today.
With drug trafficking, which sometimes is interwoven with arms transactions. So we'll talk about those. And these topics, there have been thousands of articles, books, TV shows, and movies have been created. There have been investigations by the government, hearings, reports by Congress. The Department of Justice has looked into these things. The CIA's Office of the Inspector General. The information out there is incredible, including the misinformation that's out there. After all, we are dealing with an organization that operates in secrecy. So if I say something in this video that is different than what you have heard, that is not surprising. In fact, I would be shocked if everything that I said was something that you had already heard. So in this video, I'm presenting the basic information, and you can decide for yourself what you believe. And make sure you make some comments below and let the Lawyer Up world know what you think about all these various situations. So without further ado, let's head to Europe. The story begins in Marseille, which is a city in southeast France on the Mediterranean, which is the oldest city and the second largest metropolitan area next to Paris. Now, illegal heroin labs were first discovered in Marseille in 1937. These labs were run by Corsican gang leader Paul Carbone. For years, the Corsican underworld had been involved in the manufacturing and trafficking of heroin, primarily to the United States. The Corsican gang was protected by the CIA and the French government after World War II in exchange for working to prevent French communists from gaining a foothold in Marseille. It was this heroin network that eventually became known as the French Connection, which was memorialized in a classic movie of the same name. From there, the story moves to the Golden Triangle area in Southeast Asia. So the name Golden Triangle was actually coined by the CIA, and it refers to an area of approximately 1 million square kilometers that overlaps the mountains of 3 adjacent countries: Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar. Now, this area has been one of the largest opium producing areas of the world since the 1950s. And most of the world's heroin came from the Golden Triangle until about 2002, when Afghanistan in the Golden Crescent.
Exactly. The United States will create a false moral reason for being someone. From being somewhere. They will create a false moral reason for being somewhere. You know, like the war on drugs, the war on terror. They will create these false narratives to justify going to these other countries. And if there's not a commodity or something that they want there, the United States won't even go there, which is why they were in Afghanistan, because they got the poppy fields and over there, and which is why they were in all these other countries. There's always something that they want from those countries, and if somebody's in the way, that person becomes a terrorist. That person becomes public enemy number one throughout the world. And the first thing that they do is they'll use their propaganda machine, the media, to justify and beat the war cry and the war drum to justify going over there and snatching up whatever they have over there in their interest. Now, there's never a war on drugs. There's a war of drugs, because if it wasn't for illegal business, most of these countries will fall apart.
Crescent became the world's largest producer. Now, the first allegations of CIA drug trafficking in the Golden Triangle surfaced in 1949 during the Korean War, but much more concrete evidence surfaced about a decade later during the Vietnam War. So everybody knows about the Vietnam War, right? The United States had aligned with South Vietnam, and we were trying to keep the communist regime.
And most other soldiers that came back from the Vietnam War were addicted to heroin. So that lets us know why they were over there.
Regime of North Vietnam from moving down. It was highly publicized. What people don't recall is that there was basically the exact same war, albeit much less publicized, going on right next door in Laos. Same issue. So the United States government says, hey, CIA, we got our hands full over here in Vietnam. Why don't you guys take over Laos? Which, of course, is easier said than done because the CIA doesn't have any military troops. So here's what they did. The CIA surrogate there was a Laotian general, Vang Pao, who enlisted and trained 30,000 Hmong tribesmen into the service of the CIA to fight against the communist insurgents. Now, the Hmong, that's spelled H-M-O-N-G. It's an ethnic group. The H is silent. Now, they ultimately lost this fight, which is why now in the United States, we have such a large Hmong population comprised of people who originally were political and economic refugees after this conflict. But that's, of course, a different story. Let's get back to the CIA's secret war in Laos. And this was between 1961 and 1975. So the Hmong at issue lived primarily in an area called the Plain of Jars region, which is an area that has thousands of jars. And these are prehistoric above ground burial pods, basically, that date back thousands of years. Now, the jars are an interesting footnote, but they are less important than the fact that this area is great for growing opium poppy. And that's what they did there. The Hmong tribesmen grew and had grown for generations opium, and the entire community depended upon its cultivation and exportation to survive. The problem was the major airstrip that they used to get opium out of the area had fallen into enemy hands. Having no way to transport their opium out of the region, the Hmong were faced with economic ruin. So enter Air America. Air America was a CIA-run airline that provided civilian support to the United States operations in both Vietnam and Laos. This included transporting food and supplies, soldiers. They did photo recon missions, search and rescue missions, food drops, weapon drops, anything basically that was needed for our forces in Vietnam and Laos. And they had small or light planes that could land on the little dirt runways that were created near the Hmong poppy fields, where the larger planes that needed a formal airport could not land. So to avoid the financial devastation of the tribe and in return for fighting for America's cause, the CIA-run Air America assisted the Hmong in flying their opium to its intended destination. Now, this allegation has been supported by statements from former CIA Tony Poe, several Air America pilots, and other people that were involved in the war. Now, before long, someone, and there were unproven allegations, it was a mafia family from Florida, established a heroin drug refinery right there. So then it's alleged that actual heroin was being ferried out on Air America planes. Now, this accusation is hotly disputed. In numerous books and articles and TV shows, Air America was alleged to have profited from transporting not only opium, but actual heroin on behalf of the Hmong leaders, or of at least turning a blind eye to the local military doing so. Dr. Alfred McCoy, who is a professor of Southeast Asian history at the University of Wisconsin, and who is considered the authority and expert on this topic, he wrote a book called The Politics of Heroin: CIA Complicity in the Global Drug Trade. And he states, and I quote, "In most cases, the CIA's role involved various forms of complicity, tolerance, or studied ignorance about the trade, not any direct culpability in the actual trafficking. The CIA did not handle heroin, but it did provide its drug lord allies with transport, arms, and protection. In sum, the CIA's role in the Southeast..."
But that's not culpable. You provided them with all of that, a way to transport it, protection. When they say weapons, that's protection. but they're not culpable.
Asian heroin trade involved indirect complicity rather than direct culpability. Now, it's important to note that several other historians have also written that Air America was not involved in the drug trade. They cite examples from people who lived and worked around Air America in Laos at that time. Interestingly, following a 2009 Freedom of Information request, a document entitled Undercover Armies, the CIA and Surrogate Warfare in Laos was released. And it stated that while the CIA was prohibited from carrying opium on any U.S. chartered flight, that only larger packages were inspected, such that small amounts of opium might have been transported unknowingly. So it seems that even the CIA is acknowledging that it probably happened. And if you're interested in seeing this story played out on the big screen, it is portrayed, at least in part, in the movie Air America. Now let's change continents and head to Nicaragua for that mess. So between 1979 and the early 90s, the United States backed a resistance group generally referred to as the Contras in Nicaragua. Now, Contra is short for La Contra-Revolución, or counter-revolution in English. And their mission was to topple the communist government run by the Sandinistas, who had taken control after the Nicaraguan Revolution.
Yet when Emmanuel Noriega flipped on them, that's what they do. I try to get people to understand that they know what the people are doing when they charge them with something later on after they flip on them. Like Saddam Hussein, like Osama bin Laden. These people did dirt for and with the United States all over the world. So did Emmanuel Noriega. They did big business together. And when Emmanuel Noriega, or when they're done with their tools, they break them. That's what they do when they're done with their tools. They break their tools. I keep saying, you will not be a tool collecting dust in a shed when the United States is done with you. They're going to break you. They know you did it because they was there, but they are the power. So they can charge you with what you did with them, but the fact that they're the power, you're the one who go to jail. And all the co-conspirators walk free, even if they're the president of the United States and they sold drugs with you.
Got it all? All right. So the Contras were originally backed by the United States, both financially and with arms. However, they engaged in some systemic terrorist attacks, not only on the Sandinistans, but also on civilian sites. And after some human atrocities came to light, the public opinion of the U.S.'s support began to wane. So in 1982, Congress officially forbid any further support of the Contras by the United States, said you can't do it. But without any financial or arms support from the United States, the Contras really had no chance, and that would mean communism would win. And President Reagan was not about to stand for that. So he continued to support the Contras under the table through the CIA. But now that it was forbidden by Congress, they had to figure out a sneaky way to do it. And they came up with two ways. Number one was drugs, and number two is what we now refer to as the Iran-Contra scandal. And we're going to talk about that briefly. So, Iran, they had their own conflict going on, and they were under a weapons embargo, and so they were having trouble arming themselves. So the Reagan administration between 1981 and 1986 sold arms to Iran under the purported notion that it was doing so to free 7 American hostages that were being.
They sold the drugs to Iran to fight Iraq with. And they sold the drugs to Iraq to fight Iran with, but there was hostages that was held over a year in Iran. I remember this clearly because I was probably in the 8th or 9th grade when that happened. But when Ronald Reagan became president, they held him all the time. Carter was still the president, but when Ronald Reagan became president, he made the deal that freed the hostages, and he started giving Iran and Iraq weapons.
Being held in Lebanon. Now, this was thought odd because at the time of the first sale, the hostages hadn't even been taken yet. And it was odd because the proceeds from which Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North secretly diverted to the Contras in Nicaragua. This was, of course, prohibited by Congress, and so we had a scandal. And it was a big deal at the time. Oliver North and others testified before Congress and said they didn't really remember anything. He was later tried and convicted on 3 felony charges, and there were several other indictments that were issued, as well as 11 total convictions, all of which were either vacated on appeal, dismissed, or were ultimately pardoned by George H.W. Bush after things had blown over.
Exactly.
Now, in addition, not only did the Contras receive support from arms sales, but they were also allegedly receiving support from illegal drug trafficking. In 1989, the United States Senate Committee on Foreign Relations issued the Kerry Report, which was the result of an investigation into drug trafficking from Central and South America into the United States. And the report concluded, and I quote, "It is clear that individuals who provided support for the Contras were involved in drug trafficking. The supply network of the Contras was used by drug trafficking organizations, and elements of the Contras themselves knowingly received financial and material assistance from drug traffickers."
Now, Frank Lucas and Ricky Ross got their drugs from the federal government, the CIA, and the United States military. That's where they got their drugs from. Both of them.
Now, the Kerry Report was on the heels of a series of articles published in the San Jose Mercury News by a Gary Webb, which concluded that the Nicaraguans linked to the CIA-backed Contras had smuggled cocaine into the United States, which was cut and sold as crack cocaine in LA, with the profits funneled back to the Contras. Now, his articles asserted that the CIA was aware of the cocaine transactions and large shipments of drugs into the United States by Contra personnel. And
again, they did things in secret. They knew it because they were involved. They are the one who brought the drugs over and put them on the street, flooded the neighborhoods with the drugs. It started from the West Coast and it crossed over to the East Coast.
Directly assisted drug dealers to raise money for the Contras. Now, this allegation is hotly disputed. The Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and the Washington Post all launched their own investigation into this, and they totally rejected Webb's allegations. Now, Webb later published a book based upon his series of articles. It was called Dark Alliance: The CIA, the Contras, and the Crack Cocaine Explosion. And if you are interested in that, a 2014 movie called Kill the Messenger depicts the whole Gary Webb saga, which ended in his death, which was considered suspicious, very suspicious if you look at.
Again, the CIA will murder anyone who are in their way, even if he's the president of the United States. They will murder you.
Into it. So regardless of whether the CIA was involved or not, it is clear that there were a lot of drugs coming into the United States in the 80s, which begs the question, how was it being done? And of course, I can't tell you every way it was being done, but I can tell you a major way, and that was by a fellow named Barry Seal. Now, Barry Seal was an ex-commercial pilot who became an international drug smuggler for the Medellin drug cartel. He got his introduction to Pablo Escobar and the cartel really by chance, as he sat in jail in Honduras for smuggling cocaine. After their initial connection in 1981, Seal transported lots and lots and lots of cocaine for Pablo Escobar. At his peak, he earned up to $500,000 per flight transporting shipments of cocaine from Colombia to the United States. And by 1983, SEAL's team had $60 million in earnings. In total, his team made over 100 flights, smuggling an estimated 56 tons of cocaine into the United States, worth about $4 billion. SEAL's method was to use low-flying planes and dropping his cargo into remote areas of Louisiana. And after the authorities got suspicious, he altered operations north to a little town in western Arkansas called Mena. Now, there is a lot of controversy as to whether Mena Municipal Airport was the CIA site of a major influx of drugs and an outpouring of arms sent to the Contras in Nicaragua. Anyway, SEAL would go on to get convicted in the United States. And in 1984, he turned DEA drug informant. And in June of 84, as a DEA informant, he was actually able to gain footage of Pablo Escobar himself loading cocaine into one of his planes. However, not long after SEAL's involvement as an informant, that was leaked to the press. And by July, the story was plastered on the front page of the Washington Times. And so while SEAL's work was done in relation to the Medellin cartel, he was still able to provide enough information for the United States to indict Pablo Escobar. So then SEAL testified in several major trials. Then he did a documentary about his involvement with the cartels. Not the best idea. After seeing that video, Escobar put out a hit on SEAL that was carried out on February 19th of 1986 when he was killed in a hail of machine gun fire outside of where he was living at the time. Now, what is not clear and what is still the subject of discussion to this day is what SEAL's involvement was with the CIA and whether he was involved in smuggling weapons to the Contras from the Mena Municipal Airport in Arkansas. Now, as the book Smugglers in the Life and Death of Barry Seal states, there is no evidence to support the claim that Barry Seal worked for the CIA. And an FBI report released in July of 2020 stated that Barry Seal used Mena from 80 to 84 to smuggle drugs for Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel in Colombia, but did not ever smuggle drugs or weapons for the CIA.
Now we're going to go to Gary Webb in his own words. The CIA Cocaine Dark Alliance
is being sort of squeezed out of the picture, and I think intentionally, because it tends to ruffle feathers. I mean, good investigative reporting does ruffle feathers, and it draws lawsuits, and it gets newspapers in trouble.
Old pirates, yes, they rob I, sold I to the merchant ship.
My name's Gary Webb. I am an investigative journalist. I've been an investigative journalist for about 25 years for daily newspapers. And in 1996, I wrote a series of stories entitled Dark Alliance, which was about CIA involvement in drug trafficking. What my story showed was that the cocaine that was being sold in those neighborhoods was coming from mainly one source, and this one source was being used to finance a guerrilla war in Central America. The general idea.
See, the CIA sold drugs, and the proceeds armed them so they can fight their secret wars. That's why they sold the drugs, so they can get arms to fight their secret wars all over the world.
The idea of the CIA dealing drugs was something that the American mainstream press had never written about before, and that's why it prompted outrage among blacks, among drug reform activists, among politicians, by the CIA, by every federal agency involved in the drug war, because it showed they weren't doing their jobs, that it was a fraud. Right after we published the stories, the support we got from the media was very favorable. Newsweek magazine did a big piece on the story and said it was well documented and well researched. The website was getting like 1 million hits a day. There were marches in Watts, there were marches in Compton, there were candlelight vigils. Every California senator demanded an official investigation. So the story itself was really building momentum. The government reaction was no reaction. And this, I believe, was a very careful strategy because nobody was going to believe the government if they came out and said we didn't do it. The proof was fairly overwhelming since we had all these government documents showing that it had happened. So what happened was they let the so-called liberal press speak for them. And they had the national security reporters at the Washington Post, who coincidentally used to work for the CIA, write stories saying, it doesn't mean anything. It was a distraction from what the story said, and it became sort of a media war between the Mercury News, which stood behind the story at that point, and the rest of the establishment media who wanted us to back away from it. And part of that reason.
What's deep about that is the CIA had their own propaganda machine pushing their propaganda so they could actually deflect the people to look at something else. The old, wind the backhand and hitting you with the front hand thing. That's what they were doing. A lot of these agencies, and altogether, the news is state sponsored. So they're not going to come and tell you that, okay, the federal government, law enforcement, CIA, FBI, all of them are selling drugs. They're not going to do that. They're going to constantly deny it while doing it in your face.
Was because these major newspapers had written about this issue back in the 1980s, but had written about it very dismissively, as if this is nonsense, it doesn't happen, it never happened. And then 10 years later, we came back with documentation showing that it was absolutely true and that it was worse than we thought. We had gotten the story out around them, and we had gotten it out in a big way that they couldn't control, and that was through the internet. And I think a lot of this was directed to the Mercury News to say, we don't care what documentation you have, we don't care what kind of story you've got, we set the national news agenda. And if we don't like your story, we will kill your story regardless of its truth. The media rejoiced when this came out because it meant they had won. They had forced a newspaper to back away from a story that was true, simply because of this barrage of criticism, of mindless criticism, essentially, that really took its toll on the editors of the newspaper. And they were being seen as sort of outcasts from the club. And I think they made a political decision that it was better in the long run to take a dive on this story and get back in the good graces of the rest of the media. It was essentially a war between my editors and myself because I wouldn't apologize for the story or back away from the story, and fought them on it publicly. And so they transferred me to a bureau that was 140 miles from where I lived, and I called in sick a lot. One of the things I'm proudest of in regards to that story is the website that the Mercury News set up, because it really was the first time that a newspaper brought its readers not only into the interior of the paper, but into the reporters' notebooks. This was a story that, as I told my editors, had a very high unbelievability factor built into it. A lot of people were going to say, this can't be true. And this story became a sensation because of the website, not because of the story, but because people could get to it. And they could never have gotten to it before because the San Jose Mercury News is a small regional newspaper in Northern California that you couldn't read if you lived in New York, or you couldn't read if you lived in LA.
That's why they sent you to that newspaper, because they wanted as less exposure to that story as possible. They sent you from a big newspaper to a small newspaper, more than likely local, so nobody can find out what you were writing.
In LA. But this story you could read anywhere in the world and see all of our documentation. So it became, and we did this on purpose to make it very hard to knock down, to make it very difficult for people to say this didn't happen. But they said it didn't happen anyway.
Oh, pirates, yes.
We're gonna skip over that. Don't want to hear that man singing. Now we're gonna go to the Bay of Pigs. Everything that went wrong during the Bay of Pigs invasion.
In April of 1962, anti-Castro Cuban exiles staged an invasion at Cuba's Bay of Pigs. The CIA, who was behind the three-day operation, would come to consider it one of the most colossal blunders in their entire history. How bad did it go? Well, let's just say that Che Guevara himself is reputed to have thanked an American government official for enabling it. Today, we're going to recount some of the most insane facts about the Bay of Pigs invasion. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, be a good patsy by leaving a comment and letting us know what intelligence operations you would like to hear more about. Okay, now we go to Cuba. In 1973, E. Howard Hunt stood before a Senate committee investigating the Watergate break-in and said, "I cannot escape the feeling that the country is punishing me for doing the very things it trained and directed me to do." What Hunt didn't say was that those things included some seriously shady stuff. Hunt joined the CIA in 1949 and quickly rose through the ranks. In 1954, he helped overthrow the Arbenz regime in Mexico. By 1960, he was helping recruit Cuban exiles willing to serve in a provisional government set up to take control of the government after the defeat of Castro. This would lead directly to Hunt's eventual involvement in the Bay of Pigs. Though he wouldn't officially resign until 1970, Hunt's career with the CIA was effectively over after the failed invasion. He would quickly fall in with the players in the Nixon White House and became a key figure in the Watergate scandal. Seeking to give themselves plausible deniability as to involvement in the invasion, the CIA sought to launch the invasion from Nicaragua. To this end, they approached President and de facto dictator of the country, Luis Somoza. Nervous that he would face repercussions at the hands of international entities like the United Nations, he was reluctant. Determined to get their way, the CIA eventually bribed Somoza into agreeing for the tidy sum of $10 million. Similarly, the CIA had helped quash an attempted coup in Guatemala against pro-U.S. government. They held a great deal of influence there and used the country as a staging grounds for the operation. The American planes that came to support the ground troops during the invasion had been disguised as Cuban planes. This is so the Cubans wouldn't shoot them down. Unfortunately, the invasion force was so disorganized
and this was actually trying to set a pretense for war, to say that Cuba attacked the United States, and that would have set off a pretense of war. President Kennedy wasn't with it, so the CIA and the Bay of Pigs just keep watching.
and ill-informed that they thought the American planes were actual Cuban planes and shot at their own air support. It's difficult to start a revolution without the support of the locals. The CIA, though their director denied it, was relying on a popular uprising to break out against Castro as part of their plan.
That's what they was trying to do. At the same time, turn the people against Castro and set off a pretense for war, and the president wasn't with it. So he ended up being assassinated because of this. That's one of the things that went wrong with the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Even convinced the U.S. military that such a revolt was likely in the wake of an invasion. Unfortunately, the Bay of Pigs was in a geographically remote area with a low population. Without a wide-ranging propaganda campaign to spread the word, most Cubans would have no way to find out an invasion had even occurred. That campaign never came. Complicating matters even further, Castro had thousands of political dissidents arrested mere days before the invasion. With those fighters out of the picture, the chances of an insurrection fell precipitously. Even worse, the timing of the arrest suggested Castro knew the invasion was coming days in advance. It has been suggested by some that
Salute to my brother Black Wild Indian. Thanks for tapping in, good brother.
the only way to explain the spectacular failure of the Bay of Pigs is to assume failure was what the CIA wanted all along. But why would the CIA want the invasion to fail? Well, the agents in command of the operation didn't believe Castro could be overthrown without a full-scale U.S. invasion. This theory holds that the agency sought to manipulate President Kennedy into ordering that larger invasion by arranging for the smaller invasion force of exiles to fail sooner rather than later. After the invasion failed, President Kennedy ordered a military review of the operation to figure out what had gone so wrong. That report, which would remain classified for decades, concluded that both Cuba and the USSR knew of the invasion plan long before it occurred. In fact, the review determined that the communists knew of the plan before the rank-and-file members of the invasion force did. This implies that someone higher up in the chain of command must have leaked the information. The report further concluded that Allen Dulles, then head of the CIA, knew that the Cubans and Russians knew of the plan, but let it go ahead anyway. This is often cited as further evidence that the agency wanted the invasion to fail.
Porque lo que no pueden perdonarnos los imperialistas es que estemos aquí y que hayamos hecho una revolución socialista en las propias narices de los Estados Unidos.
On April 15, 1961, the CIA sent several B-26 bombers to raid Cuban airfields with the intent of dealing a blow to Castro's Air Force. Painted to look like Cuban military planes, the aircraft eventually landed in Key West, Florida. Their pilots presented themselves as defectors who stole the planes of their own accord and flew them during the attacks. Of course, as we've already established, Castro knew the invasion was coming. To protect his aircraft, he had them scattered throughout the country. The vast majority of the planes were unharmed, and the damage was minimal. This failure meant that Castro would be able to attack planes providing air cover for the invasion force. Alarmed by such a possibility, the Kennedy administration refused to provide any such air support.
Will not be under any conditions be an intervention in Cuba by United States Armed Forces. This government will do everything it possibly can, and I think it can meet its responsibilities to make sure that there are no Americans involved in any actions inside Cuba.
Both American military personnel and civilians were involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion, and the CIA spent decades trying to cover up their deaths. Take the story of Thomas Pete Ray. He was a member of the Alabama Air National Guard, and he specialized in flying the same B-26s that Castro's Air Force mainly used. The CIA needed pilots like Ray, so he was recruited along with several of his fellow guardsmen and sent to a staging ground in Nicaragua to prepare. By April 19, 1961, the invasion was in dire straits. Ray and his fellow pilots were told they could help the invasion force by attacking sites near the Bay of Pigs, but if they were captured or killed, they would be disavowed as mercenaries. They went anyway.
This was what they would consider a secret war. The president said he didn't want the United States military to get involved in this, but the Central Intelligence Agency was going to do it secretly. See, that's the thing. They fight these secret wars that's not sanctioned by the United States. And being that Kennedy wasn't with that, they actually held that against them, because when they went over there, they disguised their aircrafts as Cuban aircrafts. And the soldiers also disguised themselves as Cuban soldiers.
While conducting a strafing run near the invasion landing site, Ray was shot down. Miraculously, both he and his flight engineer, a man named Leo Baker, survived the crash. However, they were quickly caught and killed by the Cuban militia. Baker was buried in a Cuban cemetery. Ray, who was Caucasian and whose presence supported the notion of America.
And they actually told them, if you get caught, it is what it is. That's what they told them when they went on this mission. If you get caught, it is what it is.
American involvement in the invasion was embalmed and placed in a freezer until 1979. His remains were eventually returned to his daughter. The families of both men were told their fates, but also told to keep the information secret. It wouldn't be until 1988 that the CIA would finally acknowledge their connection to Ray and his fellow lost airmen. All of them would receive the Distinguished Intelligence Cross, which is the highest award the CIA can bestow. The Bay of Pigs has been re-examined repeatedly over the decades since it occurred. One of the interesting facts that has been uncovered is that several units of U.S. Marines were apparently in the general vicinity of the invasion site. Some analysts have suggested that this Marine presence was part of the CIA's plan to draw Kennedy into a larger invasion. If that was the case, it didn't work. When the administration refused air support for the operation, they also told the Marines to stand down. One Marine who was part of that force recalled that explosions were already going off in the distance when they received that order. The Marines didn't have the numbers to repel the 60,000 Cuban troops that they would have faced. It's likely that if Kennedy hadn't held them out of the Bay of Pigs, many of them would have been captured or killed. The buck stops with the president, and John F. Kennedy decided to take public responsibility for the Bay of Pigs invasion and its failure. Behind the scenes, though, Kennedy blamed the CIA and felt they had misled him about the mission. He also felt that they were doing their best to wash their hands of the disaster. A few months later, Allen Dulles and several other ranking members of the CIA were dismissed or allowed to resign. Dulles's role in the Bay of Pigs remains mysterious. Many accounts hold that he was fully aware of and in control of the situation, but more recent reports have suggested that Dulles may have been deteriorating mentally during the planning stages. In an unusual move, he had delegated the tasks of organizing the invasion and keeping the White House informed to a subordinate. He is also alleged to have missed important meetings and displayed odd and eccentric behavior in the course of his duties. With the Cubans having advanced notice of the invasion, the U.S. Marines being held out of the battle, and the lack of air support, you'd think the Cuban exiles would have been slaughtered. Yet only 118 members of the anti-Castro Cuban invasion force died during the Bay of Pigs. This seems especially incredible when you take into account that the Cubans, with home field advantage and vastly superior numbers, lost 176 members of the military and an estimated 500 to 4,000 militiamen. Still, nearly 1,200 anti-Castro fighters were captured. After the invasion, Castro found himself with over 1,000 American prisoners. In exchange for their safe return, he demanded expensive industrial machinery and tens of millions of dollars. However, he eventually settled for $53 million worth of food and medical supplies. All of this was provided by private companies. The U.S. government, who still maintained they weren't involved in the invasion, had no official role. The first prisoners returned were 60 seriously injured men who were released in exchange for a payment of $2.5 million. This was quickly followed by a mass release, which included almost all of the remaining members of the invasion force. These prisoners were returned to Miami, where they were greeted by over 10,000 supporters. However, one Bay of Pigs exile would remain in a Cuban prison until 1986 before being released and returned. The real reasons behind his quarter-century of detention were never explained by the Cuban government and remain a mystery to this very day. No matter how you slice it, the Bay of Pigs was a complete disaster. It embarrassed the United States and emboldened their enemies, bringing the world closer to the brink of nuclear catastrophe. The Cold War lasted for decades, and while it did eventually come to an end, it's hard not to wonder what history would look like if the Bay of Pigs invasion hadn't been such.
Yeah, the Bay of Pigs invasion was a complete failure.
Without a doubt, Cuba is an integral and key part of Cold War history. Cuba, in a very short period of time, went from a close American ally to a close ally of a sworn enemy, and Havana and Fidel was not afraid to poke the bear. Eagle? In the months and years after the revolution, Washington hoped to remove Fidel from power.
Every nation and its president, prime minister, whatever you want to call them, was allies to the United States and became an enemy to the United States because they didn't allow the United States to just take their natural resources and commodities, and the United States want people to give them things like cheap and not the value that it really is. And if you don't roll with the United States and how they do things, they'll make you an enemy, and they'll call you a dictator, they'll call you all these evil names while doing it themselves. They'll do that, they'll call you evil names, say you're a dictator, you're a terrorist, you're mistreating your people, when they don't have the moral credibility to speak about people in their nations like that.
Power and bring Cuba back into its orbit. I'm your host, David, and this week we are going to look at the culmination of the American campaign to remove Fidel, the failure that was the Bay of Pigs invasion. This is the Cold War.
See, when they try to remove a so-called dictator of a nation, they have to paint the person as a ugly person and paint them as like they did with Saddam Hussein. They painted him as an ugly person. They went over there to this man's country and arrested him as the president of that country, took him to another country, convicted him on some bogus ass trial and charges, and then hang him in front of the people. As if the United States have moral credibility, like it's some presidents that was in the office here that didn't deserve to be tried and convicted and imprisoned.
Now, before we start talking about terrible national security operations, if you're looking for a stylish way to keep your money and cards safe, then you need the sponsor of today's video, Ridge Wallet. These wallets from Ridge come with, my favorite is definitely the burnt titanium. Each wallet comes with a lifetime warranty, TCW, and use the code REVOLUTION, ending more than 5 years of fighting for control of the island. But it wasn't really the end of the fighting. No sooner was his government established than it was met with counterinsurgencies aimed to unraveling everything he had achieved to that point. No less than 117 militant counter-revolutionary groups were formed, most of which took refuge in the Escambray Mountains, from where they fought a 6-year-long bloody struggle against Castro's forces. Now, the Escambray Rebellion, as the conflict between the government troops and the insurgents became known, is a story for another day, but if you're interested, please let us know in the comments. However, there are a couple of things we need to take note of regarding the rebellion. First of all, the animosity with which the war between the government and the rebels was fought forced many of the rebels to seek refuge in the United States, from where they planned to launch an invasion, increasing the anti-Castro vehemence of the Cuban diaspora.
Peace to DJ ZPE. Thanks for tapping in, good brother. Salute to you.
It also created reactions from the US press, who accused Castro and his government of being undemocratic and bloodthirsty. Castro certainly didn't take these press comments well, but they weren't the reason for the continued souring of US-Cuban relations. It was things like the Cuban government nationalizing Cuba's oil refineries. This action was taken in response to US corporations who controlled the refineries refusing to process oil purchased from the Soviet Union. In retaliation for the refineries being nationalized, the US banned the import of Cuban sugar. This, in turn, prompted Castro to seize more American-owned assets, and for the United States to then impose a strict economic embargo on the 13th of October, 1960. In addition, incidents such as the sinking of the vessel Lucubre, which Fidel blamed the US for, as well as the fact that Cuba was starting to be used as a stepping stone for many revolutionaries trying to stage communist uprisings across South America, placed further strains on the relationship between the two nations. These increasingly heightened tensions drove the CIA to create and execute a multitude of different plans to assassinate Fidel Castro, as well as other important revolutionaries like Fidel's brother Raul and Che Guevara. Parallel to the numerous and admittedly creative assassination attempts, by early 1960, the CIA had formulated a plan for an armed invasion of the island using Cuban exiles opposing Castro's regime. President Eisenhower, recognizing the increasing hostility and possible threat that a communist Cuba could pose to the United States, tasked the CIA with creating an invasion plan to topple Castro's government. Preparatory work began with CIA Director Allen Dulles assembling a team of agents, many of whom were veterans of the successful 1954 coup in Guatemala, which of course you all know about since you watched our episode covering it. Now, in March of 1961, Langley received a whopping $13 million allowance in order to deal with Castro, and covert operations began shortly afterwards. These included, but were not limited to, the buildup of an intelligence network inside Cuba, the training and equipping of paramilitary forces outside the island, as well as the acquisition of logistical support for these units, and of course the agency's old-time favorite, a propaganda campaign to be carried out on the island itself. And yet, despite this mandate, for the 6 months that followed, these covert operations, mainly focused on supporting and reinforcing the already present anti-Castro insurgents in the Escambray, were met time and time again with failure. With little progress being made, Langley explored plans for an all-out amphibious invasion.
Now we're going to go to George Herbert Walker Bush and his criminal legacy. And the only thing that happened as a result of all this criminality is that he left his family with unlimited generational wealth by doing what he did all over the world. Saying someone is a terrorist while doing all the down bombing, doing the terrorism yourself, but the person you're bombing is a terrorist, but you're doing all the bombing. And with the contracts and the snatching of commodities and whatever they was over there for, created generational wealth for the Bush family. All these are crimes of humanity and against humanity that we can actually sue his family for. our people can actually sue the Bush family for crimes of humanity that George Herbert Walker Bush did, especially in the United States, because he's responsible. He and his son, in particular George Herbert Walker Bush, is responsible for the crack era. Next, we're going to go to how the United States created a drug dictator.
Victory over drugs is our cause, a just cause. And with your help, we are going to win.
On the 20th of December 1989, the United States launched its biggest military operation since the end of the Vietnam War. More than 25,000 soldiers poured into the small Central American Republic of Panama, supported by air power and a huge intelligence operation.
On December the 20th last year, the Latin American Republic of Panama was being liberated.
On paper, the invasion was about restoring democracy. In reality, this was a drugs bust, carried out to arrest one of America's most wanted traffickers. And this drug lord wasn't your typical on-the-run fugitive hiding out in the jungle. In fact, it was Manuel Noriega, the head of the Panamanian military and de facto ruler of the entire country.
Noriega is responsible for the terror on our streets.
And somewhat awkwardly for the US, Noriega had been...
Noriega is not responsible for the terror on anyone's streets because no drugs can get anywhere besides if they're let into the country. But I'm going to move away from this video because this video is a Vice video, and Vice monetizing their videos. So I'm going to move away from this video because they're not going to allow it to play on the replay. So I'm just going to move away from it and go to the next video. George Herbert Walker Bush, American War.
As the sun set over Washington Monday, President Bush's coffin arrived at the Capitol. A hero's welcome heralded by cannons and a 21-gun salute.
The national religion of the United States is American exceptionalism. And we are now in the midst of a grotesque canonization of one of its...
He's an American war criminal.
Herbert Walker Bush. Every media outlet in this country, every politician, Democrat and Republican, engaged in collective eulogy based on lies. Lies about who Bush was, lies about his policies,
all lies, all lies.
He oversaw during his life at the highest levels of power in the United States government. George H.W. Bush was an unrepentant war criminal who spent the overwhelming majority of his life...
This video is courtesy of The Intercept.
...making the world a worse place, a more dangerous place. And he leaves behind a global trail of tears, of bloodshed, of death and destruction. His legacy can be seen in the poverty and corruption of Central and Latin America. It can be seen in the never-ending killing fields of Iraq. It can be seen in the international criminals that he pardoned after Iran-Contra and the systematic violence of the so-called war on drugs. This legacy can be seen in the scourge of AIDS, the presence of a sexual harasser, Clarence Thomas, on the Supreme Court, who, in a sick irony of history, replaced Thurgood Marshall, the first Black Supreme Court justice and a noble man. George H.W. Bush came from a powerful family. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth to a father who cozied up to the Nazis, desecrated the grave of the indigenous leader Geronimo, and whose businesses contributed to the imperial agenda of forcing the poor of the world into indentured servitude. This is the eulogy that George H.W. Bush should be receiving.
Fact.
Instead, we have this.
Throughout his long life, George Bush was admired as a man of decency, modesty, and uncommon achievement.
I just want to get up into heaven, and I don't get there by bragging on myself. My mother told me that years ago.
George Herbert Walker Bush today is being remembered as a great man and as a gentle soul.
The 41st president honored today not just as a statesman, but as a father and neighbor. The Houston.
What do we expect a demon, or how do we expect a demon to remember and memorialize another demon? They're going to say this person was a good person, knowing emphatically that he wasn't.
Houston Symphony paying tribute to his love of colorful socks.
The U.S. and international news media are engaging in sick propaganda. Leave the stories about how classy he supposedly was, how cool his marriage was, how he built a father-son relationship with Bill Clinton, how much he liked Barack Obama, how he always wore those funny socks. Leave all of that to the family in their private memorials. But for the rest of us, for the rest of the world, we must remember that his incalculable crimes were committed in public.
Exactly.
From the highest chambers of power in the most dominant nation in the world. The accounting for his crimes should also be done in public. But no, we're told we have to have respect. We're told that now is not the time to discuss any of this. We're told that we must pretend that he was not a mass murderer with so much blood on his hands. Donald Trump doesn't have enough time left in his life to commit even a fraction of the international crimes that George H.W. Bush carried out during his decades in power.
But I'm absolutely certain that Donald Trump will try his best.
At the CIA, as vice president, and ultimately as president. Not even close. Journalists today believe that they're so brave in calling out Trump's lies, in investigating his real estate deals, in probing his associates, and yet none of them have the spine to accurately describe the well-documented, indisputable crimes committed by George H.W. Bush. What we are witnessing is a powerful media class and an elite political.
What they count on is us, the people. They count on us, the people, to not remember what George Herbert Walker Bush did when he was in power. They count on us to forget it. But we don't forget what he's done. All the harm that he did to our people here in the United States, to our people in particular, but to all people, we do not forget it.
Class whitewashing the life of a man who used his various positions not to make the world a better place, but to wage unthinkable wars, to undermine democratic movements, to kill innocent people, to orchestrate coups and invasions.
All of that.
And the reason no one talks about these crimes is because it's a sacrilege to do so in the American religion of exceptionalism.
I'll never apologize for the United States of America. Ever. I don't care what the facts are.
When an unarmed black man is...
He don't care what the facts are. He will not apologize for committing crimes against humanity.
Shot dead by the police in this country, the media is often flooded with stories about how they were troubled kids, how they had criminal records, or they were drug users, how they had run-ins with the law. The pictures used in these stories are often ones where the men are presented as thugs or as scary. Journalists probe deep into the lives of Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and Eric Garner.
The jury in the George Zimmerman murder trial is expected to learn today that Trayvon Martin had marijuana in his system when he was shot.
These are the final moments of 18-year-old Michael Brown. So we've taken you inside of this convenience store. We've heard from Ferguson police that they say he was without a doubt involved in what they call a strong arm robbery.
Shortly after the funeral ended, one of several search warrants connected to the investigation became public record. The list of some of the items seized from Botham Jean's apartment, including a small amount of marijuana.
News organizations did everything in their power to smear.
Every time this wicked-ass police so-called officers kill somebody, they always try to criminalize their victims. That's the first thing they do, is try to criminalize their victims.
these black men in death with absolutely no regard for their families or respect for their humanity. If George H.W. Bush was treated the same way as these black men, it would take months of nonstop 24/7 coverage to even begin to describe the tip of the iceberg of the unforgivable deeds that Bush committed. Why? Because he committed his crimes as president of the United States, and the nature of his crimes was imperial. He did it with bombs and tanks and invasions and coups. In watching the gross hagiography on display this week, I'm reminded of the quote from Voltaire: "It is forbidden to kill, therefore all murderers are punished unless they kill in large numbers and to the sound of trumpets." That is who George Herbert Walker Bush was, a man who killed in large numbers to the sound of trumpets. You want to talk about disrespecting the dead? Let's talk about the 400 people that Bush incinerated in a Baghdad bomb shelter in February of 1991.
I remember that.
How does this celebration of their murderer and his sense of humor and funny socks feel to their families? And let us remember the so-called highway of death, where Bush authorized the mass slaughter of retreating Iraqi military units, bombing thousands of vehicles and killing untold numbers of soldiers in retreat.
They turned it into a trash heap.
Pilots called the 3-mile-long stretch of charred bodies and vehicles the highway of death. Initial reports were of tremendous carnage, thousands dead.
Now, we all know that Bush's son, George W. Bush, lied the U.S. into the invasion and occupation of Iraq. But it was a lesson that he learned from his dad. In the build-up to the 1991 Gulf War, powerful public relations firms or
George W. Bush also said he went into Iraq because he said that Saddam Hussein is a man who tried to kill his father. So in all actuality, George W. Bush was avenging his father's potential murder.
Orchestrated a campaign to convince the world that Iraqi soldiers had gone into Kuwaiti hospitals and killed babies in incubators and stabbed pregnant women.
I believe that.
This campaign, based entirely on fiction, culminated with a bipartisan congressional hearing supposedly on human rights. It featured a young Kuwaiti girl who fought back tears as she claimed to have been a volunteer at a hospital in Kuwait where she witnessed these atrocities.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor.
How much they paid her to say that?
It was horrifying.
What the public was not told at that time was that this little girl was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. This whole thing was orchestrated by powerful American PR firms. And this girl had witnessed none of these fake crimes.
Exactly.
But the lies were repeated over and over as Bush made his case for war.
They had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
Both U.S. wars against Iraq were based on lies, and both were run by presidents named Bush.
Exactly.
If you speak honestly about who George H.W. Bush really was, then you, by necessity, will be indicting the history, the politics, the legacy of the United States. If you speak honestly about Bush, then the myth of American exceptionalism is laid bare.
Well, that's going to do it for this stream this evening. The CIA and drugs, the Bay of Pigs invasion. I want to thank all who joined me this evening. I appreciate it. I hope this information is pertinent as a history lesson. But before I go, I want to do a little promo.
Get your copy of Fire. It's definitely a must-read. If you enjoy Hood books, this one is it. Just like the title of the book, it's officially Fire. Get it on Amazon, paperback or Kindle.
The once goal-driven, ambitious Sapphire turns to the street life after the sudden death of her big brother Dre. Dre's best friend Devontae tries to honor his homeboy's last request of looking out for his baby sister. A rebellious Sapphire makes it very difficult for Devontae to carry out his promise.
I want to thank everyone for joining me this evening. I appreciate it. And I'm going to keep the information. I'm going to keep it coming. I'm going to do my research, my due diligence, and bring the best information that I can find. And I hope that you learn something, and I hope it's enjoyable to you. This is your brother Nasir. This is the Enemy's Public. I want to thank DJ ZPE. I want to thank Black Wild Indian, Sharon Walker, Big Dog Philly OG, Chief, Crazy Overstanding. I want to thank my wife, Mrs. the Enemy's Public, my biggest supporter, the one who gives me the strength to get up and do these things. This is your brother Nasir, and this is the Enemy's Public. Peace.
Whether you like it or you don't like it, you love it, you hate it, one thing for damn sure, you are gonna respect it.